Hello friends and welcome back. It's Sarah Liz, and today we're going to use the 3D embossing folder of the month from Spellbinders. But I just wanted to remind you there are only a couple days left to sign up for clubs for the month of September. That large die of the month is one of my very favorite die sets, maybe of all time. It just is good for all occasions. There's the small die of the month, and if you bundle those two, you can get the Die Hard Club, and it's like 35 bucks and free shipping. Here are the cards we're making today using the 3D embossing folder and then some other supplies from my stash. But that embossing folder would also go really well with the stitching die of the month. And then there's a whole bunch more clubs, right? And so the clubs open for new subscriptions on the 6th of the month, and they close on the 27th. Spellbinders clubs are an amazing bargain. Like, it's a really great product, and you get it at kind of a discount when you buy it the month it comes out. If you get more than one club, like that Die Hard, I'm telling you, or the total package where you get all the things, you save a ton of money. It's free shipping. You get 10% off your Spellbinders orders for the rest of the month. That total package does not include the Better Press of the month or the Wax Seal of the month. Those are new clubs that they added. I'm curious to see what happens in January. They usually like shuffle things up in January, and I'm wondering if there's a version that will include those. So here's my embossing folder, and we're going to make two cards at the same time. I am using some craft cardstock, and I've just rubbed the back of it with a baby wipe, and then I run it through my Gemini Junior, and I get this really beautiful, really deep emboss. And I find when I'm doing cards like this, it's just as easy to make two cards as it is to make one card. I will often go over my embossing with an ink pad of some kind. Here I'm using white pigment ink, and I have two pads, well, three really, but for all practical purposes, two. And this is the one that's a little bit dry. And I am trying to hold this straight up and down. I don't want to go in at an angle at all, and I'm dragging it ever so lightly over the top of my cardstock, okay? And I find that using a pad that's a little bit drier is better for me. I don't end up with ink sort of pooling and ending up in the valleys of my embossed panel. Because it's white pigment ink, I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. It does not take very long. And then I'm going to trim it down. I find that my panels shrink a little bit when I run them through an embossing folder that has that much detail in them. And then sometimes my edges aren't straight. So I am just coming around and trimming off a tiny little bit, and ultimately I'm going to end up with a panel that is 4 by 5.25. I'm going to add these onto some top folding A2 card bases, and when I have something that's deeply embossed like this, I really like using Beacon 3-in-1. It is a solvent based glue. Think like rubber cement but better, okay? And that just means that there's no water in there. And so it's not going to make the panel wetter. It's not going to warp it. And I get really, really great coverage on the back. I don't have to worry about putting too much glue on and things getting wet. Here, this one is slightly trickier because I'm putting it onto matte gold, so it's a little slippery. This is going to wiggle for a while. It takes a minute to grab onto regular cardstock, and then on top of something like this, even longer still. I just wanted a very, very thin matte layer underneath these panels. And so instead of cutting the matte before I stuck it behind there, I've glued them to the mat, and then I will just trim off behind it. And you can see I'm still wiggling a little bit. So if I feel like something's moving or I'm afraid to trim off another sliver, I have a little bit of time to do that. And I just go like one little sliver at a time. But I couldn't get that matte, I don't think, by trying to cut the mat first, especially not on an embossed panel. It's too narrow. It's like a 1/16 of an inch on all of those sides. And then even though that embossed panel is only a 1/4 inch smaller, you still feel like you get a lot of the card base, in this case, the red, popping through. I love this combination of craft and a deep chocolate brown and red as sort of a fall color combination, or even kind of moving into Christmas as well. So I'm just going to add that down onto my card base. And for this one, I have the craft and a matte gold matte. And then it's this like blackberry plummy color. that I love so much with gold. And so I'll center that on there. And then I have 2 of these card bases ready to go. And I can decorate them however I want. You could make a bunch of these with a bunch of different embossing folders and just keep those in your stash. And then you can add your sentiment and a couple of focal die cuts whenever you know kind of what the occasion is and who you need it for. You know I love an emergency card. This is not new on this channel. This is maybe just a different permutation of that. I love these mushrooms. This comes from the Autumn Wonder die set. There was like all this envelope of Wonder stuff came out in August, and I hadn't really used the mushrooms. They have a handful of layers. They come together really easily. And I want to just kind of mix and match and find a way to let these small die cuts shine without feeling like I had to make a card that had 1,000 die cuts on it. And when you have an embossing folder that coordinates this, I don't know that these were supposed to go together. These are different months and different releases. But if you have, you know, something with leaves on the embossing folder and then something naturey in your die cuts, like, it's simple, right? You know, if you've spent any time on my channel, that I am absolute garbage at clean and simple. Like, I just don't know how. More is more pretty much all the time. So this is about as close to clean and simple as I get. I thought at first that I was going to be able to put these cards together with just the mushrooms. Dreaming big. We're going to add a few more die cuts, but nothing else that's layered. Okay, so these are also pretty quick and simple. There's only a couple of pieces that we're layering up, and they're not difficult, right? I also love, I chose just these 2 mushrooms because they nestle in against each other really beautifully, right? The smaller mushroom curves down and to the right, the larger mushroom, the stem curves down and to the left. So I am going to look for a sentiment that isn't going to get in the way, that isn't going to try to outshine the mushrooms, that isn't drawing attention to itself too much. And I have this stamp set. It's the Sunday Drives All Occasions stamp set, maybe my most used stamp set from anybody, not just Spellbinders. And I'm going to do 2 different cards here. So this first one, I'm using Gilded embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. And every time I use it, I have to remind myself that when the powder goes on, it doesn't look like it's going to stand out well enough. But once you heat emboss it, it's all good. So that first one says, thanks for all you do. And the second one, it's just a happy birthday, right? And I feel like these cards can lean masculine, and I don't have enough masculine cards in my stash. I never do. I would love to know in the comments below, what is your philosophy for masculine cards? How do you go about that? Do you have a formula that seems to really work? Do you have men in your life who are just really easy to make cards for? And if so, what do they like? My guys tend to really like pop-up cards and funny cards, and then a couple of them really like nature-y things. And so, yeah, I think this will work really well for that. This is the mini everyday Glimmer sentiments, and I'm just grabbing out like a little sentiment label die. You could totally cut these out using just your trimmer. You don't need a sentiment die, but I thought that made this a little bit easier, and it flags the end, which is something I tend to mess up when I try. So I'm going to start to arrange things here. I have my sentiments, I have my little mushrooms. I really did think maybe I was going to use just the mushrooms. But in the end, I grabbed a few more pieces from this Autumn Wonder. This set is huge, and it's just different. I love that you get the 4 mushrooms, you get 2 different acorns, 2 different pumpkins or gourds, and then a whole bunch of leaves. So I started playing around with the leaves, and I found that if I tucked the stems of the leaves together, it created this little trio that was the perfect place to nestle my mushrooms, right? It just drew your eye down to this small focal point and let the rest of the card be, again, as close to clean and simple as I get. So I have some sticky mat. This is just a piece of it. I buy them bigger and I cut them down. They're really cheap. I get them on Amazon. I'll try to link them below. And I am lining it up into the corner of my card, and then I'll pick all of the die cuts up. They're stuck to the mat. And I'm going to start picking things up kind of one corner at a time and just tucking the tip of my glue bottle under there so that the die cuts that are going to be on the top when the card is finished are still adhered to the die cuts behind them. And then I will add glue all over the back. I'm being generous. It's not a thick amount of glue, but it's in a lot of places so that even with all of that texture, it's going to stick well. And then I'll just line that grid back up into the corner of my card and I will lay it back down. I know some people really like press and seal for this. It's too fiddly for me. I end up like waving it all over the place, and then I've got glue places where I didn't want it, or I can't get the placement right, or I'm too clumsy for that. So for me, the sticky grid works a little bit better. Then I'm going to come in and bring some thin foam squares. These are 1 millimeter thin foam squares from Spellbinders. And just because of the different textures on here, I felt like that end of my mushroom needed to be raised up a little bit so it didn't look all wonky. And then we're going to work on the sentiment. I want it to go kind of right across the top, but again, I have lots of layers of cardstock. So I'm going to begin by stacking up some extra slivers of cardstock behind the sentiment, just so it's sturdier and it's not going to get warped or wonky. And then I will end up adding some foam tape just on the ends where that sentiment is going to overlap the least amount of cardstock. But right there in the middle where we have, you know, a couple layers of mushroom and of leaves and of embossing, right? That's the highest point of the card. And so that works really well. These are in black. I like trying to hide the foam adhesive as much as possible. Do people look at our cards from the side? I do. I mean, I look at my cards from the side. I don't know that I would do that to somebody else, but I notice. And so if it's dark cardstock, I like a black foam square. If it's a lighter cardstock, I'll use a white foam square. You can always change the colors of your foam by using an alcohol marker or a Sharpie and coloring the edges. But that finishes up card number 1. I could have done the exact same thing for card number 2, but I thought let's switch it up just a little bit. I thought I was going to put the sentiment down low, and actually in editing, I'm looking at it and I'm kind of wishing I had, but we're not. We're not. I've nestled my leaves together. Again, I just kind of tucked the stems underneath the leaves and created that little trio of leaves. And then I will end up with my mushrooms kind of on top and the sentiment on top of that. So I'm wiggling things around and trying to get my placement right. And for some reason, when I change the color of cardstock, sometimes using even the same placement is really hard. It doesn't look the same. The balance of color and of pieces doesn't feel right anymore. So yeah, it took me a while to decide to do essentially the same thing. And instead of the sticky grid, in case you don't have one, this is the other way I sometimes go about things. I will just pick things up one corner at a time and then stick them back down. This is a little more challenging because sometimes I can't really see where I'm putting the glue. Like I can, but then I'm also trying not to lift up the leaves that I've already glued down, or I'm trying not to put a fold in a die cut or something like that. I really think that the sticky grid is easier, but I definitely wanted to show you more than one way. Also, sometimes I just don't want to dig out that sticky grid because I don't always put things back where they go. Adhering the leaves one corner at a time kind of did me in. So here we go one more time. We'll sticky grid it up and I'll grab my mushrooms, and this way I know exactly where they're going to end up and I don't have to worry about placement. I can't arrange flowers, you guys. Sometimes my husband will buy me flowers for no good reason, or Valentine's Day or my birthday or something like that, and I love them and I love that he bought me flowers, but then somebody has to take them like out of the packaging and put them into a vase and trim the bottoms and make them look good, and that person is not me. I mean, it is me, it's usually my job, but I am not good at it, and I will catch him like a day or two later trying to fix it, or going in and changing how much water is in there, or adding more flower food. I mean, at least one of us has a green thumb. You guys, I can't A couple years ago, one of my favorite coworkers who didn't know me very well at the time gave me a succulent as a secret Santa gift. I took it home immediately and handed it to my husband and was like, please don't kill it because I will. It is still alive. It is awesome. And that finishes up card number 2. You'll have to let me know which of these 2 is your favorite. Let me know what you do for masculine cards. Tell me how you feel about embossing folders because I'm a little obsessed lately. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.